Welcome back to The Breakdown with me, NLW. It's a daily podcast on macro, Bitcoin, and the big picture power shifts remaking our world. What's going on, guys? It is Monday, September 8th, and today we are talking about enterprise blockchains. Before we get into that, however, if you are enjoying The Breakdown, please go subscribe to it, give it a rating, give it a review, or if you want to dive deeper into the conversation, come join us on the Breakers Discord. You can find a link in the show notes or go to bit.ly/breakdownpod. Well, friends, we are firmly back in the era of enterprise blockchains thanks to the Genius Act. While there have been a number of rival stablecoin chains announced in recent months, none have gathered as much controversy as Stripe's. On Thursday, CEO Patrick Collison announced the new Tempo blockchain, writing, "At Stripe, we care about high-throughput, low-latency payments use cases. As the use of stablecoins in crypto more broadly grows across Stripe, Bridge, and Privy, we found that existing blockchains are not optimized for them." He commented that Bitcoin, Ethereum, Base, and Solana are all incapable of the 10,000 transactions per minute that Stripe needs to clear. So Stripe have incubated Tempo as a new Layer 1 in partnership with Paradigm Ventures. Collison continued, "Tempo is an independent company with Stripe and Paradigm as the first investors." He listed a series of initial design partners, including Anthropic, OpenAI, DoorDash, Shopify, Revolut, Visa, and several major banks. Collison added, "We will start with an independent and diverse validator set and plan to move towards permissionless validation. Tempo will have a built-in stablecoin AMM to enable platform neutrality with respect to different stablecoins, and Stripe itself will of course continue to work with many chains as first-class partners." Now, this statement might as well have been a bingo card for pissing off every faction on crypto Twitter. Solana folks were offended by the idea that they couldn't scale to handle the traffic. Ethereum folks were distraught at yet another project choosing to roll their own infrastructure instead of deploying as a layer 2. The anti-VC folks were screeching over yet another VC chain launching. Ethereum educator Anthony Sassano remarked, "It seems that Stripe's new L1 has managed to annoy every crypto tribe equally. Finally, something we can all come together on." Essentially, the crypto industry as we know it is facing something of an existential crisis. The world is coming on-chain, but it's not using the existing infrastructure that many spent a decade of their lives building. Underneath the tribal shouting match, there was one really large question. In the era of enterprise blockchains, does decentralization still matter? And if it does, can Stripe deliver it? Matt Huang, the founding partner of Paradigm, took to Twitter to explain a little further, writing, "Tempo will be a permissionless chain. On day one, anyone will be able to deploy a token, and anyone will be able to transact on the chain. Some projects think that attracting real-world usage in serious institutions requires giving up base layer neutrality. We do not think that, and that's not how we're building Tempo. The plan for Tempo is to have permissionless validation and permissionless smart contract deployment, as well as permissionless usage, just like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, etc. We'll start with a permissioned validator set to get going and decentralize further from there." Huang explained that the chain will enable compliance tools for asset issuers and money transmitters, but the base layer is intended to be neutral and permissionless. He continued, "As many parts of the mainstream world look to adopt crypto, we think there is a risk if they adopt permissioned systems. Our goal with Tempo is to help onboard them onto crypto rails that solve specific payments needs while still being truly permissionless." So after that, everyone kind of calmed down, they understood where this group was coming from, and they went off to focus on other things. Right? Absolutely not. Indeed, Huang's comments did little to calm the crowd. To give one example of the general tone of the commentary, David Hoffman, the co-host of Bankless, wrote, "In Matt's defense, I think Tempo is truly doing what they can to optimize for credible neutrality. What he's not saying or admitting is that despite Tempo's best efforts towards neutrality, if they're real, Tempo will only ever be able to access a small fraction of the credible neutrality that the crypto community considers real. So yes, Tempo is trying to be as credibly neutral as possible. Just what's possible in the context of a Stripe and Paradigm-led L1 is very low versus what the standard is. The standard is Ethereum." Now, digging into this a little bit, the comparison isn't necessarily Ethereum as a network, but instead about the stablecoins built on top of it. Ethereum has good decentralization on the validator level, but both Circle and Tether run stablecoins with fully centralized freeze and seize capabilities. While the validators can't vote to freeze anyone's money, a single risk manager at Circle can. Past Ethereum forks have also made it clear that Circle essentially decides which fork is valid by selecting which flavor of USDC to accept redemptions from. There was also a brief period following the Tornado Cash sanctions where a large portion of validators were censoring transactions. In other words, even the base chains that have credible neutrality doesn't necessarily translate to credibility in practice when it comes to specific commercial applications. Now, while Stripe and Paradigm were defending themselves against crypto Twitter on one side, Patrick Collison was also dealing with skepticism from the fintech community over on Hacker News. Responding to someone asking whether real businesses were finding crypto and stablecoins useful, he laid out 5 key benefits: speed, cost, reliability, needing fewer currency conversions, and giving broader access to US dollars. Collison wrote, "Acknowledging the obvious, a reflexive answer frequently invoked here is it's a regulatory arbitrage. I think this is some combination of misguided and incurious as an explanation. First, stablecoins are now formally regulated in the US and in Europe, so their use is now very explicitly regulated. Second, it implicitly assumes that the only reason one would seek an alternative to the traditional ways of doing things is because someone is doing something illegitimate. I think this usually indicates a lack of understanding of the challenges, complexities, and costs associated with high-volume cross-border money movement." Essentially, Collison seems to be saying that this is something kind of close to a decentralized version of the SWIFT system. In fact, he noted that one of the big reasons that Stripe is adopting stablecoins and building their own infrastructure is that the SWIFT system is far too unreliable. He noted that using traditional rails, money frequently just goes missing, and Stripe's team needs to go hunt it down. Nick Carter commented that it was, quote, "refreshing to see Patrick tackle these stablecoins are only popular because of Reg Arb excuse head on, which is what you always hear from payments people. It always bothered me because it allowed the smart payments professional to completely dismiss evidence of stablecoin traction by implying it was all gray and black market and unsustainable." He continued by referencing another common argument, "But stablecoins don't adhere to the KYC AML payments regime and governments will realize this. Too bad. The regime was clearly too restrictive and not efficient at finding crime versus making ordinary life difficulty, and that's why people love stablecoins. First and foremost, they let you do your business without a bank or government peeking over your shoulder the whole time. Yes, there are other benefits, but this is the main one. So think of stablecoins as a market signal that the Bank Secrecy Act has gone crazy. What really happened here is that for a while, stablecoins were a Reg Arb, and then eventually, to the dismay of the payments people, the regulations converged with the new market reality introduced by the crypto people, which was significantly more permissive than the prior regime. So the government came to meet us rather than the government staying rigid and banning stablecoins as most payments people wanted. This is one of the core unspoken theses behind a lot of what crypto people do. Saying it out loud makes it less likely to succeed. We acknowledge that governments don't like and even might consider illegal a lot of what we do. But if you get enough traction and critical mass, you can change the reality on the ground and force the state into a difficult choice. Ban something popular and hard to block, or accede to a new regulatory reality which has been imposed by the market. Now, even for Nick, this is a dense take. But this is a critical part of the Bitcoin and crypto story to understand. Bitcoin wasn't accepted by the government just because it was good for the people or good for the Trump family, as much as some would like to think so. Even before this year, Bitcoin was a market signal that the value of holding wealth outside of the fiat system was going up. The government fought against that signal for many years with varying levels of success, but ultimately a new reality was imposed by the markets. To a certain extent, this is the story with stablecoins as well. Yes, the infrastructure is better than ACH or SWIFT, but stablecoins are also a good opportunity for a fresh slate rethink of the Bank Secrecy Act. One upside of Stripe launching this blockchain with credible if imperfect neutrality is that they can't be forced to bake compliance on the base layer. If permissionless international payments is something the industry truly wants to achieve, there is a certain logic to having as many shots on goal as possible. Of course, the flip side of that point of view is the question of whether we truly want Stripe sitting in the middle of global payments, even if there is some level of decentralization. Crypto developer Matterkel wrote, "I think crypto just met its ultimate villain. Don't fear the man who tries to build a centralized VC chain. Fear the man who wants to build one under the premise of credible neutrality and decentralization." Nick Van Eck, a former VC who's working on rival stablecoin Agora, commented, "Stripe has clearly gotten to the stage where they are comfortable playing with fire. Tempo is a clear shot across the bow that they are trying to build the next generation Visa network. There are many features here that make it a more practical network for businesses. The credible neutrality and collaboration is because Stripe maybe doesn't want to risk appearing to solely build a competing payment network. Which they clearly are in gaslighting everyone while doing so. They are openly declaring war against everyone building in stablecoins, the payment networks, and the banks. Now, if you've been here for a few cycles, then the play feels familiar. Christian Catalini, a co-founder of Lightspark, wrote in Forbes on Friday, "Stripe just pulled back the curtain on Tempo, its corporate blockchain, and the pitch is a classic. You get an all-star team, state-of-the-art tech, an impressive roster of partners, including one of the card networks the whole thing is designed to replace, and quote-unquote neutrality. The price for this grand bargain? Just handing the fintech giant the keys to global payments. If this gives you a powerful sense of déjà vu, you're not alone. The only question is if Stripe can write a different ending for the movie that Meta already showed us." Now, Catalini helped create the Libra project inside of Meta back in 2018, which ultimately led to congressional hearings, crackdowns, and a long-standing distrust of crypto. In fact, for many politicians, Mark Zuckerberg, rather than Paolo Arduino or Justin Sun, was the big bad guy in the crypto industry. And interestingly enough, Stripe was a core part of the consortium building Libra. Patrick Collison even received letters from Congress during the Libra investigation calling on him to explain himself. Catalini gave a post-mortem on the Libra project, which is interesting in its own right, but made the point that this time is very different, remarking, "What makes the situation fascinating is the paradox at its heart. After a decade of spectacularly failed attempts to build their own private blockchain clubs, the big banks are finally, grudgingly coming around to the idea that open, permissionless networks are the only way forward. At the very same moment, a new generation of challengers led by Stripe and Circle are betting everything on the opposite idea, that the future belongs to slick, branded proprietary chains." He noted that the idea of credible decentralization sounds great until you actually have the infrastructure up and running, and then it's nearly impossible to resist tilting the playing field in your own favor. Catalini asked why any sane competitor would trust Stripe enough to run their own stablecoin on Stripe's infrastructure. He continued, "This isn't a new insight. It's the very dilemma crypto was designed to solve. As Chris Dixon catalyzed it, crypto's purpose is to break this cycle of broken promises. It's the same fundamental economic truth we identified at MIT almost a decade ago. The only thing that truly separates crypto from the systems it aims to replace is that it's permissionless. Full stop." Catalini noted that his biggest fear while working on Libra was never the regulatory fight or the battles in congressional hearings. It was the fear that he wouldn't be able to win the internal debate to make the network permissionless. Like Tempo, Libra was intended to launch as a permission network and transition to decentralization over time. Catalini concluded, "If corporate chains like Tempo and Arc succeed, it will mean the crypto experiment was not a revolution but a failed coup. The backend technology would be different, yes, but the market structure would be eerily familiar. We would simply swap an old monarchy of card networks and financial sector incumbents for a new one of fintech giants. The throne would have new occupants, but it will be the same throne. And in our fractured world, that reign would inevitably split along geopolitical lines. There is little chance the West and the East would agree to live under the same corporate king, leading not to a unified global system, but to at least two powerful competing empires. Ultimately, Stripe's Tempo is a referendum on the ghost of Libra. If that ghost was merely a product of bad timing, then Tempo is poised for a historic victory, and the crypto world's original dreamers may finally have to accept a more pragmatic, centralized reality." The crypto industry has come a long way since the Libra battle. One paradoxical point, however, is that the lack of a government threat has changed the incentive structure dramatically. Bitcoin's maximally decentralized design likely wouldn't be used today as there's simply no need. But back in 2008, the primary concern was that the government would shut it down before it got off the ground. Absent a government threat, there's less of a reason to maximize for decentralization. All it does is make a blockchain less efficient. But all of that only holds true if you think there will never be a government threat ever again. Andy, the co-founder of the Rollup podcast, wrote, "A reminder to everyone out there that crypto is entering its practical era. In light of regulatory clarity and institutional appeal, we're moving deeper into revenue and value territory. We're moving away from DAOs, Fugazi decentralization, overemphasis on idealism and tribalism, and into real, albeit unsexy, categories of moving all of finance on-chain. The world doesn't care about your maximalisms. They care about their bottom line. They care about practicality, they want control, they want to scale." Now, with that in mind, some believe that decentralization is important enough that it needs to be mandatory. Miles Jennings, the head of policy at A16Z Crypto, tweeted, "The decentralization debate isn't just raging online, it's also playing out in Washington. Crypto market structure legislation will either recognize the importance of eliminating control or ignore it. So if you believe decentralization matters, it's time to fight for it." Crypto lawyer David Kerr commented, "Getting this right will save a lot of future pain. The lessons regarding credible neutrality should already be learned. But if they haven't been, they will have to be learned again and again until it takes. Decentralization is essential and will remain essential regardless of where current public sentiment settles. It would be better if the road were made easier and the path became more clear, but if it remains hard or even if it gets harder, it doesn't really matter because it's still the path that needs to be taken." Now, ultimately, the arguments around Tempo raged all weekend, and this episode is barely scratching the surface. If you want to take away anything, it's that to many, many people, decentralization and neutrality still matter a great deal. But is it still important to the success of blockchain infrastructure? That question is one that's just going to be answered over time. For now, that's going to do it for today's breakdown. Appreciate you listening as always. And until next time, be safe and take care of each other. Peace